Welcome to FS-ISAC's podcast, FinCyber Today. I'm Elizabeth Heathfield, Chief Communications Officer at FS-ISAC. Today's guest is Meg Anderson, the CISO of global financial giant Principal. Amazingly, Meg's actually been at Principal for more than 30 years, and so she's played a critical role in the growth and maturing of its cybersecurity program as the firm has expanded both its business lines and the markets it serves. She definitely knows what goes into both building and running a successful cyber function. Thanks for being here, Meg. So let's start with the fact that you manage a pretty sprawling enterprise organization. Principal's got asset management, insurance, retirement, 25 countries, 19,000 employees. So that's a pretty wide span to manage the security of. So what's your approach to centralization and enterprise control versus decentralization and spreading out control throughout the enterprise?
Well, thanks for having me, Elizabeth. I think that's a great and timely question for us as we think about our company as one company. We have one stock symbol, and that means we have one reputation. And so we do need to think about cybersecurity as an enterprise risk to manage. We have one set of information security policies for all those countries and employees and lines of business and standards as well that guide the global organization. And that makes sure what I have found is it makes sure everything is in one place and it's very clear. But sometimes the how may vary in some circumstances. But our goal is to really create a path so the most effective way to get something done with the appropriate security is easy across the entire organization. And we use that with we get that with our centralized policies and standards, as well as a lot of shared security technology. And I think you used the word control in your question, but I see this less about enterprise control and more about enterprise enablement because our customers and, of course, our regulators do have requirements and expectations that we need to demonstrate. And working from the center out into our business makes the process of doing that much more efficient. And we also use a business information security model, which is fairly common in large global organizations. And so that allows us to stay close to the business units so we don't get off track in terms of where their strategy is taking them, how security might be impacted, how we can help them. They have small teams that engage with business unit engineering teams, as well as product teams in the business areas to really understand what their key stakeholders are looking for, as well as their customers.
With all those employees, how do you keep all of them aware and educated? So forget about the security people. Now let's just talk about 19,000 employees. How do you keep them, constantly aware and up to speed on cyber awareness and cyber hygiene?
Well, we use a multitude of ways to do that, like most CISOs. We some of us rely on the creativity of a training and awareness team, or we put our creativity hats on occasionally in smaller shops, right, to keep cyber awareness engaging and then relevant to the business. So things like blogs, external speakers, looking at incident reviews, podcasts like this one, and of course we have computer-based trainings. But what we have found effective is a lot of gamification or competition across the organization. When you have a leaderboard for training, competition between countries, teams, it adds some fun and motivation to the training. And of course, prizes always help too, things like t-shirts and gift cards or pizza parties. We did just recently launch an escape room for Cybersecurity Awareness Month,
Hmm.
and members of our senior leadership team did quite well. They embraced the competition, and having senior executives talk about cybersecurity training is very powerful for employees.
Yeah, I would imagine. Because I feel like I'm constantly talking to people about how you can make something it feels like a chore, mostly.
It can.
Right? It can.
Yep,
So,
it can.
you know, we have to
One
make
of
it
the things
sexy.
Yeah, one of the things I really like to do is to get my cyber defense team out and talking to employees about the things that actually happened. Because oftentimes employees think, Well, we never hear of any breaches at principal. Knock on wood, we're doing the right thing. So, what exactly is that team doing? What does cyber defense really mean in that environment? So, we might walk them through a phishing email that came in, or we might walk them through the difference between the emails that come into the organization as compared to the emails that actually make it to their inbox, and all the various controls around email security that happen in between. And those are things they're not exposed to.
Yeah.
So it's very beneficial, and it helps them connect the dots.
Yeah, I think that's great. So let's talk about talent. Everybody's talking about talent, so let's talk about talent. I thought the way that you framed it in our initial email exchange about managing risk associated with cyber talent was kind of interesting. Um, so can you talk about how you think about it, in terms of recruiting and retaining talent as managing risk?
Sure. And talent management is one of the risks we talk about with our operational risk executives. But in a nutshell, if we don't have the people to meet our obligations that we've made to our customers, we put our company at risk. And so when we talk about talent, we have to not only think about the here and now, we have to also think about how we're creating a pipeline of talent for the team and really for the industry. So I do hold my leaders accountable to nurture and create that pipeline. And so some of the things that they do, and this I don't dictate how it gets done, but I do have an expectation that they get out in our local community, attend meetups, get the word out about what we do at Principal, what openings we might have, what skills we're looking for. I set an expectation that they mentor both inside and outside of the company. We have a company mentoring program, and that might not be mentoring anyone to be a future cybersecurity employee, but helping them
Mm.
understand what we do is very beneficial because they have friends and family, they have coworkers, they run into people. And if those people know more about what happens on a cyber team, they're more likely to say, "Hey, why don't I set you up with this person to have a conversation about it?" That just happened to me in the last week. A friend of mine said, "Hey, I was talking to my chiropractor, and they have 16-year-old twins that are interested in getting to cybersecurity. Do you mind if I give them a contact can I give them your contact information?" And I was like, absolutely. So those kinds of things that happen sort of serendipitously are really important in terms of the long-term talent pipeline. We also have an excellent internship program. And so we do get a lot of entry level employees through our intern program. And I encourage all of my leaders to host interns. It is more work, but they
It's work.
also, yeah, we're seeing some very bright students come out of colleges as compared to a decade ago. And so they can bring a great new perspectives to the team. We're also sponsoring a couple of the FS-ISAC Women in Security scholarships. So that's a new thing for us this year. And really, from a strategic workforce planning, we just regularly look at the makeup of our team so we can think about what skills we're going to need in the future, where they might work, what are the locations, et cetera. So managing the risk to make sure we don't find ourselves in a position where we don't have the people that we need to get the job done is just something that's always top of mind.
Mm.
Does that help?
Yeah, no. It's just I think it's really obvious when you say it, but I don't think that most people, like, I don't hear people talking about it in terms of managing risk, and that's something that they're talking about with, their risk people. But of
Hmm.
course it is. it's
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
obvious when you point it out that way.
yeah. We talk about it all the way up to the board of directors.
Good. I mean, I think that that's
Yeah.
I think that that's necessary, especially now,
Yes.
in great resignation time, and cyber talent is so scarce that it's in such high demand, and the salaries are going up and everything. You just did a Wall Street Journal article that I thought you made some interesting points in about that as well. One is that essentially, I think you were saying that you were quite lucky in that principal largely, prioritizes investing in their talent, and, making it a great place to work, and being on the lists of being a great place to work, and that kind of thing. Um, which I imagine means that, you have an easier time retaining talent, and also potentially hiring talent from within the company, because people may want to change, but they want to stay. at the company because it's a great place to work,
Right.
which is cool. The other thing that I thought was interesting was that you were saying that a lot more, 43% of your team is now remote, which I think, everybody had to go remote, but then you hear a lot of people talking about, well, security teams should really be physical. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on both of those points and just expand a little bit on them.
Yeah, sure. At Principal, turnover has settled down for now. It would be nice if it was sort of a consistent pattern from here into the future, because we did certainly see a spike during the Great Resignation. But what we learned with that recent uptick and changes in the market were that people do value flexibility. Principal was very flexible pre-pandemic. I actually worked part-time for 8 years prior to being the CISO here at Principal. I was in the engineering team, and people would move to other states and want to remain with the firm, as you said, and we would work through that. So we had the technology in place to do it at a smaller scale before the pandemic, and we had processes in place. Of course, like everybody else, we've gotten way better at that remote experience for employees. As well. But I think we'll continue to be flexible. But people do want a good experience. No matter where they're working, they want to have a good experience, be able to collaborate, whiteboard. And we've created these great work from home experiences. And we want to make sure we also create good in office experience. So knowing what percentage of the team is remote, what percentage of the team will be in the office, what days are people generally selecting to be in the office, kinds of things do we want to provide? What's the technology footprint of the office? You can see our beautiful campus behind me, and it would be a shame for people not to come to the office and experience what we have here. But part of that flexibility comes with very much intentionality around leadership. So you really have to make sure that you're doing what's right for the individual person, but at the same time, make sure that works out for the team. So what's the right amount of collaboration that you and your team need? How much does that need to be physically present? How much is it cross team? How much is it across the company, across discipline? Of course, security partners quite a bit with fraud and privacy and compliance and legal and risk. So, where are those people? How do we make sure we're building those relationships? And then, of course, making sure people have time to focus and get their work done. So, I think leaders really need to understand, where are your team members, where do they see themselves, and then work through with them is, how is that development going to happen? Is it going to happen at principal, or are we going to prepare them for their next job because we don't see that there's that opportunity at this particular point in time for them? During the pandemic, I think it's interesting, we've had 3 boomerang employees, so 3 individuals who left our team and have returned in the last year or so. So we have a great culture. It includes empowering people, investing in development, and in technology areas like cyber. We have AWS training as we move to the cloud. We have specific training related to security. Certifications, of course, are always on the table. And we make sure our leaders are really accessible and create a culture that inspires people to do their best work and is energetic and inviting. So, it's probably a little bit more like team leadership, people leadership on steroids is a little bit what we're experiencing now, because everybody's got their point of view on how they want to work and where they'll do their best work. And as leaders, we need to adapt.
Hmm. You mentioned the boomerang thing was interesting for me because at a firm that I used to work at, I may have changed now. I think it actually probably has changed now. But at the time, if you quit, you were basically dead to them. It was like
Mm,
seen as treason. And I knew that when I left, that like that was it. I didn't have that opportunity. I wouldn't have that opportunity again. But I think that now it seems like people are recognizing that, well, maybe you didn't get everything that you needed, then you went somewhere else, and now you have more skills. And so you're actually more of an asset when you come back. Would you agree with that?
yeah, I do. I think that you get a different perspective. So people who leave and go to another firm, they often will come back and remark about what they didn't value when they were at principal that they didn't realize so much that they were going to miss. So there's that end of it where you get the person back and they are more connected to the value proposition really between the company and them is what they're getting as opposed to what they're giving to the company. The other component of that is they learn things. They go to another company who does things different than we do, and they can bring it back and say, hey, here's something that I learned. Here's how they looked at it. Do we want to try that? Or let's not try that, those kinds of things. So I think that's very beneficial.
Hmm. Let's talk about diversity. I know it's something that you care about. Why do you think that it's so important not for to have diversity on a cybersecurity team?
Yeah, it is incredibly important. And this week we had our team in many of our team members. We have people in 21 states now that work for us, and we had them. A large majority of them came in for a town hall this week, and it was incredible to see them in person and see the diversity of the team. And it's not just ethnic diversity, gender diversity, it's really about how you think. So, cyber requires thinking about problems from all different angles. And when you have that diverse group of people who have a variety of experience, like we were talking just earlier about being at different firms, they've been able to see how maybe like the NIST cybersecurity framework might be applied in different situations. So bringing together that variety of experiences, variety of upbringings, people from different countries, the thought process is incredibly beneficial to the team. And I think it's beneficial, and it's really important that team members have that mindset, because oftentimes we get on a path where we think we know the answer and we're just executing. And when you have somebody that chimes in and says, "Well, did we think about this problem in a different way?" It can slow you down. And as a team member, you might be thinking, "Oh, do we have to rehash this, or do we have to think about that now? Can that be in the next sprint?" And oftentimes it's that kind of conversation that I think brings the best outcomes. You know, you can have those types of minor challenges when people think different, but I think that it's fostered a culture where we've fostered that culture where it's safe to ask those kind of questions, and that people respect that when somebody questions something, it's not to be critical, it's out of a desire to learn and grow. And it's also safe to voice your opinion if it's different than others on your team or your leaders. Have that good conversation and then move forward. And I think everybody learns from experiences like that.
What are the challenges that you have faced in actually recruiting diverse talent? Is it that
Well,
people? No, God.
yeah, sorry. So you may not be surprised to know that Des Moines, Iowa is getting more diverse, but it's not it's not a hotbed of diversity necessarily the way you might have broader groups of people in larger cities. But that hasn't held us back at all, especially given the flexibility that we talked about. So we have done a lot of things to attract diverse talent, as well as making sure our recruiting considers diversity when bringing forth candidates to us. I personally am engaged in cybersecurity, um, which allows me to I've mentored a couple of diverse individuals who want to get into the cyber world,
Hmm.
and things like that. So I think I think keeping it top of mind and not assuming that you can put it on autopilot is really important. I actually just learned this week that one of my diverse team members, I was counting up the states that we're in as well as the number of people, and I think we had like 3 or 4 people that are from the state of Texas, and I found out that one person referred the other person to principal, and they're friends, and it's like, oh, that's awesome. So the more intentional you can be, the better off you're going to be, and it's just going to become commonplace as opposed to something we have to do. We're just going to get the best talent.
Mm, agreed. Um, one of the big ticket issues, the kind of major threats that you're thinking about at the macro, strategic level.
Sure. So, generally speaking, we're focused on execution of our strategic plans across the company because we do have that one enterprise global program. And sometimes execution of strategic plans impact one business area to a larger degree than another business area. But one of the big ticket items that we're looking at are cloud. So we're transforming and moving to the cloud just like many others, and getting our arms around what that means from a security point of view, understanding the threats to the cloud. Um, how do we operate when some of our um, applications are in the cloud? Some of them are software as a service, and some of them continue to be in our own data centers. And what does that look in terms of the the threat landscape as well as our ability to defend? Another one of our strategic plans is really about making sure our cybersecurity value proposition is clear, making sure that the story we tell about our cyber program inspires confidence in our stakeholders, and being on the front end of that. We have a lot of customers who ask us about cybersecurity, particularly for our retirement business, but it doesn't stop there. It goes across insurance and asset management as well as in our international groups. And so, how do we make sure we're telling that story to help them understand and help with the due diligence that's done across the organizations, and financial organization in particular, where we send a lot of questionnaires to each other. So we're trying to put that story together, keep it strong, and talk through our cyber story clearly. The other thing that we're doing is we're looking at all the data that we have to try and make sure that we're leveraging it to manage our risks. So we're looking at things like risk quantification, cyber risk register, and truly understanding where are metrics telling us a story about where we need to improve or where we're doing fine, and are we able to use that data to make our program better. And then lastly, we're doing some work around workforce access. So things like zero trust, as well as a pivot to a different identity system that
Hmm.
will be focused on next year.
Like passwordless type stuff, or
Yeah, similar.
okay, can't talk about it yet, but
Yeah,
it's the way the industry seems to be going. I mean, at the recent summit that we were both just at, there was a lot of talk about it, and I had
yes.
talked about it with a couple of other CISOs for insights before. So it's clearly the way things are heading. So how do you balance all these sort of like big strategic plans with business as usual, day to day, the unsexy
Yes.
stuff?
Yeah, it's probably easier for me than it is for the team, right? Because they're the ones that are hit by the what we call drive-by questions, and I need this tomorrow, fires and things like
Right.
that. But the way that we're thinking about it, related to our strategy, is we're looking at that our ability to leverage risk management data, and we're doubling down on efforts to make sure that frontline leaders, frontline engineering teams have the data they need to make sure that they're building security into their processes, into their work, into their business initiatives. So we are hoping that we have set the stage for them to understand what it is they need to do. We'll, of course, be around for any questions, but for business as usual work, vulnerability management is an example. um, they know what they need to do. We can help them understand where they're at in the path with the data, but it's BAU work. We've provided frameworks, policies, metrics, and it's up to them to execute and adjust prioritization or the resources that they need to get it done in the front line. So we'll be focused a little bit more on oversight and helping them understand, here's where there's gaps and here's where there might need to be some more attention paid. But that's an approach we're going to take for 2023.
Hmm. Just want to go back to what you were talking about in terms of making sure you have the data to be able to essentially know what's working and know what's not working. I even
Mm-hmm.
find this even in my work, that there's this like intermediate step between collecting the data and then obviously like getting it to a place where it's usable, where like you're essentially you have to set up the right questions to ask of the data in order to be able to use it. um,
Yes.
do you do you have people, like, do you have data scientists who are specifically focused on that, or how do you think about making sure that you're asking the right questions to get
Yeah,
the garbage
that's
in
a good
garbage out
question.
problem?
Yeah, exactly. For now, we don't have data scientists. We have a data engineering team. And so they're working with others who's, for lack of a better term, have own systems that create data exhaust and determining where we should put that data, and then how it needs to be um, uh, leveraged, I'll call it,
Mm.
for whatever problem it is that they're trying to solve. So maybe an example is we have a third party phishing platform, phishing simulation platform. And so what do we do with that data? How do we connect that data? We have the ability to share within our HR system results from phishing simulations with frontline leaders. So if you have a team, you immediately know how they did on phishing tests. And so
Mm.
that takes a lot of connectivity with that phishing data back into our HR system to truly understand what where that person lines up to.
Right. Getting back to that sort of, how do you balance the big and the small? um what would you say the split in your time is? I mean, it sounds like you are get to focus a bit more on the strategic, and you have your leadership focus on the day to day. What about the split of your time thinking about the future, let's call it medium term, versus the short term, so
Yeah.
I don't know if that's 1 to 2 years versus 3 to 5 years, something like that. How much are you thinking about what's a bit further down the line?
It feels like every day we're thinking about the future and even further down the line as part of some of our cloud journey. So, very much thinking out into the future and what will that look like. I have an incredibly talented team. They're more focused on the here and now. We do a good job of balancing what needs to be done now, what needs to be done next, what needs to be done later. I also am lucky to also participate in our working group of chief information officers across the company, a very future focused group
Mm.
who provide me the insight I need into the technology plans within the business areas, as well as technology plans for the enterprise. And of course, those things are not short term; they're much more several quarters out, several years out. So, as a CISO, the here and now can change very quickly. So you still have to be attuned to that. It's just a natural part of our job, but making sure you have the mechanics in place so the team can operate without me being intimately involved with some of that here and now stuff is really the optimal
Mm.
place for me to be.
So we've had some discussions about the interaction between intelligence, security, resilience, and risk management. And what is the relationship, the interrelationships between, and the interdependencies between those? So maybe share with us, like, what do you think of as the interrelationships between those four, and how they inform your overall philosophy?
Sure. It's funny because I don't know that I always think about it like that. But when thinking about that question, it's a big question, right? Because all of those things are really important. And so maybe a story would be helpful to illustrate how I think about the interrelationships. My team and I were recently reviewing a cybersecurity framework benchmark, and it showed how several financial firms were making progress on NIST capabilities. So identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover between 2020 and 2022. And there was a real obvious large change in the respond and recover categories. And it was real obvious. It was like, well, that's because of ransomware over the last 2 years. So the threat intelligence, ransomware, informed a strengthening of security controls so those firms then could be more resilient and manage the risk of ransomware. So that's kind of how I think about that. You have a threat come in, you have to think about your controls, and then you make sure that you're resilient. You test those controls, make sure they work, and gauge whether or not you're managing that risk better than you were before. So I think that's easier to do when you're looking backwards. Here it is 2022, and it's like, oh, that's sort of correlated to the ransomware threat. That makes sense. But I also think that CISOs and their teams need to look ahead too. And so we think about those things when we're creating strategies, and we use strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, a SWOT. And we use what we know about the future when doing so. So we think about future business growth, geographical changes, markets we might want to get into, any market movement, and try and put all of that together to really consider likely or possible scenarios or where we might need to strengthen security controls based on business strategy.
Great. I guess one last question.
Sure.
If somebody wants to become you in the future, what advice would you give them, as in a CISO of a major
Sure.
global financial firm?
Sure. Well, truly, leadership skills are essential, and that doesn't always mean direct people leadership skills, but being able to gather information, win the hearts and minds of people, and influence. And that's definitely a skill that's required to do outside of the technology team. So a lot of CISOs, I think, grew up in infrastructure and technology roles. I was a COBOL developer way back when myself, but really understanding what's the business trying to do. Because in the end, security isn't about securing, right? It's about making sure the business can move quickly and be confident that the security controls are in place and manage those risks. So I think it's leadership and influence is critically important. It's funny, in our town hall I mentioned, we had some conversation about essential communication skills, listening, understanding your audience. All kinds of things related to communication would be important. And the ability to stay connected to what's in the news, because like I said earlier, things change so quickly. So if you don't have any interest in knowing what's going on, it's going to be a really hard job for you because things change so quickly. You really do need to take that time to connect with blogs, connect with experts, connect with friends in the industry to understand what's going on, connect with FS-ISAC peers, right? So that's an essential skill. And I find that doesn't come natural to people all the time. Some people would like to be heads down and, a more focused, introverted sort of stereotypically introverted sort of personality. And I think that you will have to develop the skills, whether you're introverted or not, to really make sure that you can have those one-on-one relationships with people outside of your firm as well as those inside of your firm.
Great. Anything else you want to share?
No, this was fun. Thanks for having me, Elizabeth. I appreciate it, and hope that planted a seed with somebody who might be listening to this in the future and provided some value.
Absolutely. Definitely did. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks to Meg for being our guest on this episode. Based on our conversation, I'll leave you with a quote on leadership from none other than Lao Tzu. A leader is best when people barely know he exists. When his work is done, his aim fulfilled, they'll say, we did it ourselves. If you like this podcast and want to hear more from FinCyber leaders around the world, subscribe to FinCyber Today on Apple Podcasts, YouTube, or Spotify. You can also find them, as well as articles by thought leaders, at fsisac.com/insights, and follow us on LinkedIn and Twitter. Thanks again for listening.